The night split open with the sound of shattering glass as a black SUV tore through the quiet cul-de-sac of Stone Ridge. Its headlights sliced across manicured lawns, stopping in front of a modest home where a family sat unaware inside. 4 masked men in dark jackets stormed out, their boots pounding against the driveway. With brutal precision, they smashed the front door and dragged the terrified homeowner into the street. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, trembling, yet none dared intervene. The men weren't common criminals. They were the very people sworn to protect the neighborhood, the HOA's private patrol. Marcus Hale, a former Navy SEAL and Delta Force commander, stood at a distance watching the scene unfold. He had left behind years of combat, hoping to live a peaceful civilian life, but tonight, the battlefield had followed him home. He thought Stone Ridge would be a safe place to start over. Instead, he was witnessing a nightmare. The homeowner, a retired teacher named Mr. Whitfield, had missed a few HOA payments. That was all it took. The patrol treated him like a criminal, their batons rising and falling with terrifying rhythm until he collapsed motionless on the pavement. Marcus's fists clenched, every instinct in his body urging him to act. With his training, he could take them down in seconds. Yet he held back, forcing himself to stay in the shadows. He knew this wasn't a random act of cruelty. It was a message. Victor Grayson, the powerful and ruthless HOA president, ruled Stone Ridge through fear, and tonight's violence was meant to remind everyone who controlled their lives. As flashing lights illuminated the street, Marcus realized he could no longer remain silent. This wasn't just about unpaid dues. It was about corruption, blood, and power. And deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. Marcus Hale, the former Navy SEAL and Delta Force commander, spent the following morning pacing his small apartment, his mind heavy with the images of Mr. Whitfield lying broken in the street. The memory replayed like a battle scene he couldn't escape. But unlike war zones overseas, this violence had no honor, no justification, just a corrupt HOA president sending his private enforcers after innocent neighbors. Leah, Marcus's younger sister and a civil rights attorney, visited him that day. She immediately sensed his turmoil. "You saw something last night," she said quietly, setting her briefcase on the table. Marcus hesitated, but eventually told her everything: the SUV, the masked men, the brutal beating. Leah's face hardened. "I've been warning people about Victor Grayson for years," she whispered. "He's not just running a neighborhood. He's running an empire." Leah explained how residents were trapped under a web of fines, threats, and intimidation. Those who resisted faced harassment or worse. Marcus listened, anger rising in his chest. He had fought to protect freedom abroad, yet here at home, an HOA was crushing it under the guise of community order. That evening, Leah handed Marcus a thin folder of documents, evidence she had quietly collected. Bank transfers, HOA patrol rosters, and suspicious payments linked to Grayson's name. It wasn't enough to take him down in court yet, but it was proof that the corruption was real. "Daniel Cross, an investigative journalist, is helping me," she said. "He believes Grayson is connected to bigger crimes, but we need someone who isn't afraid to face them." Marcus met her eyes, the decision already forming inside him. He hadn't wanted another fight. But Stone Ridge wasn't safe, not for Leah, not for anyone, and he knew he could no longer stay silent. Daniel Cross, the investigative journalist Leah had trusted, arrived at Marcus's apartment late that night. He was wiry, sharp-eyed, and carried the weight of someone who had spent too long exposing dangerous truths. He placed a stack of files on the table, his fingers trembling from both exhaustion and adrenaline. "Your sister says you saw them in action," Daniel said. "That changes everything. First-hand witnesses don't come easy in Stone Ridge." Marcus Hale, the former Navy SEAL and Delta Force commander, sat across from him, arms crossed, silent but focused. He flipped through the files, receipts for late-night deliveries, shell companies tied to HOA funds, and photographs of patrol vehicles parked outside unmarked warehouses. Every detail pointed to Grayson using Stone Ridge as cover for a larger operation. "They're laundering money," Daniel explained. And not just HOA fees. Drugs, weapons, maybe even human trafficking. The patrols aren't security, they're foot soldiers. Grayson built a criminal empire disguised as community order. Marcus's jaw tightened. He had spent his life dismantling networks like this overseas. To see one thriving in his own backyard ignited something he thought he had buried.
If that's true, Marcus said slowly, then Whitfield's death wasn't punishment, it was cleanup. They silenced him before he could talk.
Leah leaned forward.
And they'll do it again if we don't move fast.
The three formed a pact that night. Daniel would keep digging, using his contacts in the press to spread pieces of the truth. Leah would gather legal documents, building a case brick by brick. And Marcus, he would protect them, using his training to stay one step ahead of Grayson's enforcers. As the clock ticked past midnight, Marcus stood by the window, scanning the darkened street. Somewhere out there, Grayson's men were watching. The war for Stone Ridge had already begun. Daniel Cross had always known that chasing the truth came with risks, but he never expected the shadows of Stone Ridge to close in so quickly. For days, he and Leah worked in secret, piecing together the puzzle of Victor Grayson's empire. Marcus Hale, the former Navy SEAL and Delta Force commander, moved like a silent guardian, always scanning, always watching. Still, the walls were closing in. One evening, Daniel noticed a black sedan parked across from his apartment. Its tinted windows reflected the streetlights, giving nothing away. He tried to brush it off, but the feeling of being hunted lingered. Later that night, as he sorted files at his desk, the faint smell of gasoline drifted through the open window. Before he could react, a sudden burst of fire lit the hallway outside his door. The building shook as flames spread with terrifying speed. Daniel grabbed his recorder and laptop, coughing as smoke clawed at his lungs. He stumbled toward the balcony, the heat pressing against his skin like a wall. Below, two men in dark coats watched from the shadows. One muttered, "Grayson said no loose ends." They didn't move to help. They simply lit cigarettes and turned away as the blaze roared higher. By the time fire engines arrived, the apartment was engulfed. Neighbors gathered on the street, horrified. But it was too late. Daniel Cross never made it out. The next morning, official reports called it an accident, faulty wiring, nothing more. But Marcus and Leah knew the truth. When Leah read the headline, tears welled in her eyes. Marcus, however, felt only steel-hard resolve. "Grayson thinks he can scare us into silence," he said coldly. He just made his biggest mistake. The morning after Daniel's death, Stone Ridge felt heavier, like the air itself carried grief. Leah sat at her kitchen table. Daniel's last notes spread before her, her hands shaking as she traced his handwriting. Every scribbled line was unfinished, a story cut short. She wiped her eyes and looked at Marcus Hale, the former Navy SEAL and Delta Force commander, who stood by the window with his arms crossed, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "He didn't just die in a fire," Leah whispered. "They killed him, just like they killed Whitfield." Marcus nodded, his jaw clenched. "And they think fear will do the rest." He turned, his voice low but unyielding. "We can't let that happen. Daniel gave us a map. It's not complete, but it's enough to hit back." Later that evening, Officer Miguel Torres slipped into Leah's office, his uniform loose, his face lined with exhaustion. He dropped a small flash drive onto her desk. "This is all I could take without being noticed," he said. "Shift logs, coded messages, patrol routes. It proves the HOA patrols are being used for something bigger." Leah opened the files, her breath catching at the evidence. "This ties Grayson directly to the operation." Marcus studied the data, already thinking like a commander. "We build from this. We get the people on our side, and when Grayson comes looking, we'll be ready." That night, in a dimly lit garage, Marcus and Leah met with a handful of brave neighbors. Fear lingered in their eyes, but so did determination. Marcus spoke with the authority of a soldier and the fire of a man who had lost too much. "Grayson thinks we're weak," he told them. "But we're not. We're stronger together. And starting tonight, Stone Ridge fights back." The garage smelled of oil and rust, its flickering bulb casting long shadows over the gathered faces. A dozen neighbors sat in silence, waiting for Marcus Hale, the former Navy SEAL and Delta Force commander, to speak. He stood at the center, arms folded, his presence alone enough to quiet their doubts. Beside him, Leah laid out papers. Daniel's surviving notes, Torres's flash drive, and HOA records that hinted at the empire Victor Grayson had built. Marcus scanned the room. You've all seen what they did to Whitfield. You know what happened to Daniel. This isn't about HOA fees anymore. It's about control. Grayson runs Stone Ridge like a kingdom, and we've been living as his prisoners. But that ends now. Harris, an older resident, raised his voice. What if he comes after our families? We're not soldiers. Marcus stepped closer, his tone steady but sharp. Neither was Whitfield. Neither was Daniel. But they stood up, and so can we. You don't need to fight with weapons. You fight with eyes, with voices, with proof. We'll watch them. Record them. Track every move they make. And when they strike, we'll be ready, Leah added. We'll push the evidence to the press and to federal investigators. Once it's public, Grayson can't bury it. But we need numbers, people willing to stand together. Slowly, hands began to rise. Fear lingered, but resolve pushed through. Neighbors volunteered to keep logs, to spread encrypted updates, to film patrols even in the dead of night. The first sparks of resistance were lit. As the meeting ended, Marcus stepped outside, scanning the quiet street. He could feel eyes watching from the dark, but for the first time, he didn't feel alone. Stone Ridge wasn't just surviving anymore, it was preparing for war. The night of reckoning arrived without warning. The usually quiet streets of Stone Ridge echoed with the low growl of engines as black SUVs rolled in, headlights sweeping over the cul-de-sac like searchlights in enemy territory. Inside each vehicle sat armed men, private enforcers under Victor Grayson's payroll, dressed in dark tactical gear, their eyes hidden behind tinted visors. The HOA president was done with subtle threats and intimidation. Tonight, he planned to end Marcus Hale, the former Navy SEAL and Delta Force commander, and crush any spark of resistance that dared to rise in his neighborhood. From the shadows of a garage, Marcus stood ready, his posture calm, his senses sharpened. He had anticipated this moment, studied Grayson's patterns, and prepared neighbors for the inevitable storm. Leah stood beside him, her hand clutching a folder of evidence, her voice steady despite the fear that burned in her chest. Around them, the residents of Stone Ridge, once silent and terrified, now stood united, armed not with rifles, but with phones, cameras, and courage. Torres, the one cop who had defied corruption, moved among them quietly, ensuring every angle was recorded. The SUVs screeched to a halt, and Grayson emerged, his expression smug and cruel. "End of the line, Commander," he sneered, his voice loud enough to carry across the street. "You should have stayed invisible, lived your quiet life. But you just couldn't keep your nose out of business that wasn't yours." Marcus stepped forward, the crowd parting for him. His eyes locked on Grayson's, unflinching. "This is my business. This is everyone's business. You've stolen from these people, broken their homes, and murdered without fear. Tonight, your empire collapses." Grayson's enforcers raised their weapons, but before they could advance, lights flared across the neighborhood. Dozens of residents stepped out from porches and windows, cameras rolling, live streams broadcasting directly to social media. The truth was no longer confined to secret files or whispers. It was out in the open, undeniable and irreversible. Grayson's confident smirk faltered as he realized the trap. His men hesitated, shifting uneasily as the world watched in real time. Federal agents, tipped off by Leah's careful outreach, pulled into the neighborhood moments later, sirens piercing the tense silence. For once, the protectors of justice had arrived before blood could be spilt. The enforcers dropped their weapons one by one, forced into submission by the flashing red and blue lights and the eyes of countless witnesses. Grayson, however, refused to yield. He lunged for Marcus, his rage boiling over, but Marcus moved with the precision of his training, one swift motion, disarming him and pinning him to the ground. The crowd erupted, their cheers a release of years of fear and frustration. As federal officers cuffed Grayson, Leah stepped forward, her voice clear and unwavering. "Stone Ridge is no one's prison. Not anymore." In the days that followed, the footage spread across the country. News outlets replayed the downfall of Victor Grayson, his crimes laid bare for the world to see. The story of a once quiet neighborhood turned battleground became a symbol of defiance and unity. What began as a struggle against HOA corruption had grown into a national conversation about power, justice, and the courage of ordinary people to resist oppression. Marcus, though offered anonymity, chose to step into the light. At a massive rally downtown, thousands gathered, their voices echoing off city buildings. He stood on the stage, Leah at his side, Torres nearby, the community surrounding him. He took a deep breath and spoke, his words steady but charged with emotion. I never asked to become a symbol. I only wanted peace. But when peace is stolen, when justice is twisted into control, we have no choice but to stand. You don't need to be a soldier to fight, you only need courage and the will to protect what's right. Together, we've proven that no system, no tyrant, no corrupt hand can silence the truth forever. The crowd roared, chants rising into the night. In that moment, Marcus Hale was no longer just a former Navy SEAL and Delta Force commander, nor merely a man who had defended himself against impossible odds. He was a leader, a beacon, and a reminder that even in the darkest corners of corruption, resistance could spark a fire bright enough to change the world. The Battle of Stone Ridge had ended, but the movement it ignited had only just begun.